Welcome to another heart-to-heart episode of Healthy Kidneys After 60. I am your host, Jane Pauley, and today we are touching on a topic that sits very close to home for many of us who have crossed that 60-year milestone. Have you ever noticed your legs feeling just a bit heavier when you climb the stairs, or perhaps a slight tremor when you stand up from your favorite armchair? We often dismiss these as the inevitable price of aging, but today, we are going to challenge that notion. Joining us is a man who has spent over 5 decades listening to the stories of more than 20,000 seniors, a renowned neurosurgeon and senior medical expert who believes that your strength is not just a matter of years, but a matter of timing. Welcome to the show, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. It is truly an honor to have your wisdom with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jane. It is a genuine pleasure to be here with you and your listeners. You know, in my 50 years of practice, I have sat across from thousands of men and women who look at their legs with a sense of betrayal, as if their bodies are giving up on them. They share these quiet fears about losing their independence or falling. I want everyone listening to know that I hear you, and more importantly, there is hope. We are going to talk about why those legs feel heavy, but also how a very simple shift in your morning routine can wake up those muscles again. It is not about doing more. It is about doing things right. And I am excited to share these insights that I have gathered from both the lab and the bedside over a lifetime of work.
Dr. Gupta, I want to start with something that I think many of us experience but rarely talk about until it becomes a real problem. It starts so subtly, doesn't it? You are out in the garden, or perhaps just walking up the porch steps with a bag of groceries, and suddenly you feel this hollowness in your thighs or a momentary wobble in your knees that wasn't there 5 years ago. There is this haunting fear that we are becoming fragile, and we start to avoid the stairs or look for a handrail to grip tightly. Why is it that once we pass 60, the legs specifically seem to be the first part of the house to show cracks in the foundation? Is it just the calendar catching up with us, or is there something more specific happening inside our muscles that we aren't seeing? I would love for you to help us understand the science behind this heaviness without the complex medical jargon, just person to person.
Jane, you have described that feeling perfectly, that subtle hollowness, as you put it. What you are describing is a condition we call sarcopenia. Now, I know that sounds like a big, scary medical term, but at its heart, it simply means the age-related loss of muscle mass and strength. Think of your muscles like a retirement savings account. For decades, you have been depositing strength into it, but after 60, the body starts making withdrawals at a much faster rate than it used to, especially in the lower body. Research from institutions like Harvard and the University of Texas has shown us something quite startling. We lose muscle in our legs up to 3 times faster than in our arms or our upper body. This is why you might still feel strong enough to carry a grandchild in your arms, but your legs feel like they are made of lead when you try to stand up from a low sofa. It is a physiological shift where the muscle fibers, particularly the fast twitch ones that help us balance and move quickly, begin to shrink and are replaced by fat or connective tissue. It is not just getting old in a vague sense, it is a very specific biological process of atrophy that targets our foundation.
That is a sobering thought, doctor, that our legs are essentially on a faster clock than the rest of us. I imagine for many of our listeners, hearing that this is a documented biological process might actually be a relief. It means it is not just in their head, but it also brings up a sense of urgency. When we feel that trembling or that fatigue after a short walk, we often think the solution is just to sit down and rest more to save what strength we have left. But it sounds like you are saying the opposite is true. Is this rapid decline inevitable for everyone who hits 60, or are we inadvertently doing things in our daily lives, perhaps even in the way we eat or move, that are accelerating this leg weakness without us even realizing it?
That is the crucial question, Jane, and the answer is that while some loss is natural, the speed and severity are often within our control. The biggest mistake I see is exactly what you mentioned, the rest and protect trap. When we feel weak, we move less, and when we move less, the muscles waste away even faster. But there is a deeper layer to this, one that happens at the breakfast table. You see, as we age, our muscles become anabolic resistant. This means they become stubborn and don't respond to the protein we eat as easily as they did when we were 30. I have spent years observing how patients who eat the same things every day suddenly start losing weight and strength. They tell me, "Doctor, I am eating my eggs, I am having my toast," but their legs are still thinning out. We have discovered that if you don't hit a very specific threshold of nutrients at the right time of day, your body actually breaks down its own leg muscle to get what it needs. It is like your body is cannibalizing its own foundation to keep the lights on. It is a silent crisis happening inside the body, and most people are completely unaware that their healthy breakfast might be leaving their legs starving for the building blocks they need to stay firm and reliable.
It is almost haunting to think that by trying to be careful or eating what we have always considered a light, healthy meal, we might be starving our muscles of the very thing that keeps us standing tall. You mentioned that the body starts breaking down its own leg muscle. That sounds like a silent internal erosion. For someone listening right now who feels that heaviness or that slight tremor when they reach for a high shelf, it must feel like a race against time. If the legs are the first to go and they go 3 times faster, how do we stop that withdrawal from our muscle savings account? You have hinted that it is not just about the quantity of food, but a very specific window of time and a specific type of fuel that can actually wake up the muscle building process again, even in a 70 or 80-year-old body.
You hit the nail on the head, Jane. It is about a pulse, an anabolic pulse. In my 5 decades of practice, the most heartbreaking thing is seeing someone lose their mobility, not because they had an accident, but because they simply didn't know how to turn on their muscle growth switch. We used to think that as long as you got enough protein throughout the entire day, you were fine. But the latest science, especially from the McMaster University studies, tells us that for the over 60 population, the muscle needs a loud signal to start repairing itself. If you just drizzle a little protein here and there, the muscle stays asleep and continues to waste away. You need a concentrated burst, particularly in the morning, to tell those leg muscles, hey, it is time to rebuild. This is why someone can feel weak despite eating 3 meals a day. They are never reaching that trigger point. Throughout this conversation, I want to show everyone that we can actually flip that switch back to on. We can stop the leaden feeling in the legs and replace it with a sense of stability, but it requires us to unlearn some old habits and understand this new rhythm of our aging bodies.
Dr. Gupta, I want to lean into that heavy sense of resignation that so many of us carry like an invisible backpack. It is so common to hear friends or neighbors say things like, well, my knees are shot because I'm 70 now, or I can't go on that walk with you because my legs just don't have the juice anymore. That is just life. It feels like there is a collective surrender to the idea that aging and physical frailty are 2 sides of the same coin, and that once the decline starts, there is no turning back the clock. I wonder if you could share a story from your years in the clinic that speaks to this specific mental hurdle. Someone who felt they were at the end of their rope, believing their weakness was a permanent sentence, only to find out that the story their body was telling wasn't finished yet. How do we break that psychological cycle of accepting defeat just because the calendar says we should?
You know, Jane, that mindset is perhaps the most dangerous disease I treat because it stops people from even trying. I remember a woman named Mary Collins, a 71-year-old grandmother living in Portland, Oregon, who came to see me about 6 months ago. Mary had always been active. She loved her garden and her 3-story Victorian home, but when she walked into my office, she looked defeated. She told me she was planning to sell her house because the 3 steps leading up to her front porch had become her Mount Everest. She said to me with tears in her eyes, "Dr. Gupta, I guess I am just becoming one of those old ladies who sits in a chair and watches the world go by. My legs just feel like they are fading away." She had accepted this as her new reality, believing that her muscle fibers were simply gone for good and that she was destined for a wheelchair. It was heartbreaking because she wasn't sick in the traditional sense. She was just experiencing that accelerated sarcopenia we talked about, and her mind had already moved her into an assisted living facility before her body truly needed to be there. I looked at her and said, "Mary, your muscles aren't dead. They are just starving and dormant."
It is so moving to hear about Mary because her story is the story of millions of people who start shrinking their lives to fit their perceived limitations. When she said she was ready to sell her home just because of 3 steps, it highlights how much of our dignity and independence is tied to the strength of our thighs and calves. It seems like the surrender happens in the mind long before the muscles actually give up completely. How did you begin to convince someone like Mary, who was already mourning the loss of her former self, that her legs still had the potential to carry her? What is the first step in shifting that perspective from "I am broken" to "I am just out of balance"? And how does that internal shift affect the actual physical recovery process?
The shift starts with understanding that muscle is a living, breathing tissue that can be stimulated at any age, whether you are 60 or 96. I told Mary about the research showing that even centenarians can double their leg strength with the right stimulus. The problem for Mary was that she was caught in a weakness loop. Because her legs felt weak, she stopped gardening. Because she stopped gardening, her muscles atrophied further. She was eating like a bird, mostly tea and a little bit of toast in the morning, thinking she didn't need much fuel since she wasn't moving. I had to explain to her that her body was actually in a state of emergency. When we don't give our bodies the right signal, it thinks there is a famine and starts consuming the most expensive tissue it has, which is leg muscle. I challenged her to give me just 3 weeks of a specific morning change before she put the for sale sign on her lawn. We had to break her belief that she was past her prime and show her that her legs were actually waiting for a command that she hadn't been giving them for years. It is about reclaiming the narrative of your own aging process.
That challenge you gave her feels like a pivot point between a life of limitation and a life of renewed freedom. It is incredible to think that the body is just waiting for a signal even at 71. I think many people assume that if they haven't been a gym person or an athlete, they don't have the foundation to rebuild. But your experience with patients like Mary suggests that the body is remarkably forgiving if we just learn the language it speaks. It makes me wonder what other misconceptions we are holding on to that keep us trapped in that chair, feeling our legs get heavier day by day while we wait for an old age that doesn't have to be so frail.
Exactly, Jane. The most common misconception is that you need to spend hours lifting heavy weights to fix this. Mary thought I was going to send her to a bodybuilding gym, which terrified her. I told her that for her, the gym was her kitchen and her morning routine. We are often told that less is more as we age, eat less, move more carefully, but in reality, the older we get, the more efficient and targeted our nutrition needs to be. For Mary, her recovery didn't start with a treadmill. It started with understanding how to hit that anabolic threshold. When she realized that her weakness wasn't a character flaw or a permanent old age mark, but a manageable nutritional gap, her whole posture changed. She stopped looking at the floor and started looking me in the eye again. That is the power of science-backed hope. It gives you the permission to fight back against the calendar.
Dr. Gupta, I want to talk about a point of deep frustration for many health-conscious seniors. There are people watching us right now who take their health seriously. They eat their chicken, they have their beans, they might even drink a protein shake because they've been told protein is king. And yet, they still feel that nagging weakness in their legs. They are doing what they were told, but the results aren't showing up in their muscle tone or their balance. You've mentioned this concept from the University of Texas about an anabolic pulse and a 40-minute window in the morning. This sounds like a radical departure from the traditional advice of just getting enough protein in your day. Why is it that the total amount we eat might be less important than the specific timing and the intensity of that first meal?
This is where the science gets really fascinating and where most people are accidentally sabotaging themselves. In my clinical experience, I see people who eat 60 or 70 grams of protein a day, which sounds like plenty, but they spread it out a tiny bit at breakfast, a little at lunch, and a big steak at dinner. The research from the University of Texas, which I often share with my patients, shows that for an aging body, this trickle approach is useless. Think of your muscle like a heavy door with a rusty hinge. If you push on it with just one finger all day long, the door never opens. You need a single strong shove to break the rust and swing it open. That shove is what we call the anabolic pulse. If you don't hit about 30 grams of high-quality protein in a single sitting, specifically in that first 40 to 60 minutes after waking up, the door to muscle synthesis stays locked. Your body stays in a catabolic state, meaning it is still breaking down muscle for energy even if you eat a giant steak 8 hours later.
That rusty door analogy is so vivid. It suggests that many of us are pushing with one finger all day and wondering why we aren't getting anywhere. It is a bit of a shock to realize that our healthy breakfast of a bowl of oatmeal or a single egg might actually be keeping our muscles in a state of starvation because it isn't loud enough to wake them up. You mentioned that 40-minute window. Is there something special about the morning? Why is the body so demanding right after we wake up? And what happens if we miss that window and try to make up for it at dinner time? Does the muscle just stop listening after a certain point in the day?
The morning is the golden hour for your muscles because you have just spent 8 or 9 hours in a fasted state while sleeping. During the night, your body is essentially mining your muscles for amino acids to keep your vital organs functioning. When you wake up, you are in a deep nutritional deficit. If you wait until noon to eat a significant amount of protein, or if you only eat a small amount in the morning, your body continues to mine your leg muscles for hours. By the time you eat that big dinner, the damage is done. Furthermore, the body's ability to process protein actually peaks in the morning due to our circadian rhythms. Research shows that protein eaten at breakfast is significantly more effective at building muscle than the exact same amount eaten at dinner. When I explain this to my patients, they often realize they've been fasting their muscles during the most critical time of day and then overloading them when the body is ready to sleep and store fat. It is a total mismatch of timing.
It sounds like we have been taught to eat like kings at dinner and paupers at breakfast, when for our leg strength, it should be the exact opposite. This idea that we are mining our own legs for fuel while we sleep is a bit terrifying, but it explains why that morning heaviness is so prevalent. If we want to stop this mining and start building, we need to change the signal we send the moment we get out of bed. It's not just about the protein, though, is it? You have mentioned a specific trigger called leucine that acts like the key to that rusty door. How does this one specific amino acid change the game for someone who is tired of feeling shaky on their feet?
Leucine is the master key. Without enough leucine, it doesn't matter how much protein you eat. The mTOR pathway, which is the biological construction foreman for your muscles, won't start the job. Most people over 60 need about 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine in one meal to trigger this rebuilding process. A single egg only has about 0.5 grams. So if you have one egg and toast, you haven't reached the threshold and your muscle building remains at 0. This is the all or nothing principle of muscle synthesis. You are either building or you are wasting. By focusing on leucine-rich foods right in that morning window, we aren't just eating breakfast, we are sending a chemical command to the legs to stay strong, stay stable, and stay young. It's a total shift from eating for fullness to eating for function.
Dr. Gupta, I want to talk about the breakfast trap. Many of us grew up believing that a light and healthy start to the day was the gold standard, maybe a piece of whole grain toast with a little jam, or a bowl of cereal with a splash of milk. We feel virtuous because we aren't eating greasy bacon or heavy pancakes. But from what you're saying, these healthy choices might actually be the very things causing our legs to fail us as we age. It is a bit of a hard pill to swallow, the idea that our discipline is actually working against us. Could you tell us about a patient who was doing everything right by traditional standards, but was still losing the battle with their leg strength? How did their virtuous habits leave them vulnerable?
This brings to mind Frank Miller, a 68-year-old gentleman from Austin, Texas. Frank was a retired teacher, very disciplined, and he took great pride in his health. He walked every morning, but he noticed that he was starting to stumble on the stairs and his legs would tremble after just 10 minutes of movement. When he showed me his food diary, he was eating what most doctors would call a perfect breakfast, a bowl of steel-cut oats with a few blueberries and a cup of black coffee. He thought he was being a gold star patient. But when we looked at the numbers, his breakfast had almost zero leucine and very little usable protein. Frank was effectively starving his muscles until lunch. He was 68, but his leg strength was closer to that of an 80-year-old because his healthy oats were providing plenty of carbohydrates for energy, but absolutely no bricks to repair the walls of his leg muscles. He was essentially running his engine on empty every single morning.
It is heartbreaking to think of Frank being so diligent and yet unknowingly letting his muscles wither away. It's like trying to build a brick house with nothing but wallpaper. He had the energy from the oats, but no structural support. When you told Frank that his perfect breakfast was actually failing him, how did he react? And more importantly, for the people like Frank who are listening, why is it that these common staples like toast or cereal fall so short? We are told they are fortified and full of fiber, so why aren't they enough to keep a 68-year-old's legs from trembling?
Frank was shocked, almost angry at first. He felt like the goalposts had been moved on him. I had to explain that as we age, our efficiency at extracting nutrients drops. A 20-year-old can build muscle with almost anything, but at 68, Frank needed a concentrated signal. The toast and oats he loved were high in volume but low in the specific amino acids that signal muscle growth. I told him, Frank, you are fueling your movement, but you aren't fueling your structure. He was lacking the leucine threshold. We calculated that he would have had to eat about 10 bowls of oats to get the leucine he needed to trigger muscle repair, which obviously nobody is going to do. The breakfast trap is thinking that full equals nourished. For the aging leg, nourished means reaching that specific leucine trigger of 2.5 grams before the clock hits 9 o'clock a.m. Without it, your body spends the whole morning in breakdown mode, and by the time you have a protein-rich lunch, you've already lost ground that you can't fully regain.
So, it's a race against the morning clock. If Frank is typical of many men and women his age, they are running on empty structurally for the first 4 or 5 hours of every day. That adds up to thousands of hours of muscle loss over a few years. It makes sense why the decline seems so sudden once it starts. It's been building up silently every morning. If oats and toast aren't the answer, and we know we need this leucine key, what was the specific shift you asked Frank to make? How do we get that shove for the rusty door without eating a massive, heavy meal that makes us want to go back to bed?
I told Frank we weren't going to take away his joy, but we were going to change his foundation. I introduced him to the cottage cheese strategy. I told him that just a half cup of high-quality cottage cheese contains more muscle-building power than a giant bowl of oats or 3 eggs. It is packed with casein, which is a slow-releasing protein that keeps the muscles fed for hours, and it is one of the densest sources of leucine available. I had him add just a half cup to his morning routine. It was a tiny change, but for Frank, it was like flipping a light switch. Within 2 weeks, he called me and said, "Doctor, I don't feel the need to grab the handrail anymore." He wasn't doing more exercise. He was just finally giving his body the construction orders it had been waiting for since he turned 60. He broke the breakfast trap by prioritizing the signal over the filler.
Dr. Gupta, that story about Frank and his cottage cheese is almost hard to believe. It seems too simple that just half a cup of something so ordinary could stop a man from needing a handrail. We are so used to thinking that medical problems require medical solutions, pills, surgeries, or complex physical therapy. But you are talking about a food that most people can find in any grocery store for a few dollars. I want to go back to Mary Collins, the lady from Portland who was ready to sell her house. You gave her a 3-week challenge. What exactly happened when she started incorporating that half cup of cottage cheese into her morning Anabolic Pulse window? Did it really work that fast? Or was there more to the magic than just the protein?
It sounds like magic, Jane, but it is actually pure biochemistry. When Mary started her cottage cheese routine, she was finally hitting that leucine threshold we talked about. But there is a second part to this that is equally important: bioactive peptides. Research from McMaster University has shown that these specific peptides found in dairy protein don't just build muscle, they actually improve the communication between the brain and the muscles. In Mary's case, the results were visible almost immediately. Within the first 24 to 48 hours, she told me she felt steadier. That wasn't because she grew new muscle overnight. Muscle doesn't grow that fast. It was because her existing muscle fibers finally woke up and started firing correctly. The heaviness she felt was partly her nervous system tuning out because it didn't have the raw materials to maintain the connection. By the end of the 3-week challenge, her grip strength had increased by 12%, and her walking speed, a key indicator of longevity in seniors, had improved significantly.
A 12% increase in grip strength in 3 weeks just from a breakfast change? That is staggering. It makes me think about how many people are walking around feeling disconnected from their own limbs, thinking they are just fading when in reality, their nervous system is just waiting for those bioactive peptides to bridge the gap. You mentioned that Mary felt steadier. For a senior, steady is the difference between a life of freedom and a life of fear. It's the difference between going to the grocery store alone or staying home. Was there a specific science to how she ate it? Did she just eat it plain, or is there a way to maximize those mTOR signals you mentioned earlier?
The way she ate it was key to her success. I told her to make it her first priority within that 40-minute window after waking. We call this the anabolic trigger. If she waited until 11 o'clock a.m., the effect was halved. Mary started mixing her half cup of cottage cheese with a few walnuts, which provide healthy fats to help absorption, and a few berries for antioxidants. This combination triggered the mTOR pathway, which is essentially the general contractor of the body. It tells the cells, we have the materials, we have the energy, start the repairs. The reason it felt so fast for Mary is that cottage cheese is rich in casein, which clots slightly in the stomach and releases amino acids slowly over several hours. So instead of a spike and crash like she got from her old toast, her muscles were being drip-fed strength all through the morning while she was doing her housework and gardening. She wasn't just full, she was fortified.
Fortified is such a powerful word, it implies a defense against the world. I can only imagine the look on Mary's face when she realized she didn't have to sell her Victorian home, that those 3 steps weren't her enemy anymore. It's a beautiful example of how small, science-backed changes can restore a person's dignity. But I have to ask, for those who might not like cottage cheese or are looking for other options, is this the only way? Or is there something about this specific food that makes it the gold standard for the over 60 leg strength crisis?
While there are other sources, cottage cheese is unique because of its high concentration of leucine and its specific slow-release nature. It is the most efficient way to reach the threshold without eating a massive amount of calories. For Mary, it was the perfect medicine because it was easy to digest and required no cooking. The real magic, Jane, was seeing her realize that she was in control. By the 3rd week, she wasn't just walking up those 3 porch steps, she was carrying her own groceries again. She told me, Dr. Gupta, I feel like I've been given a second chance at my independence. That 12% increase in strength wasn't just a number on a chart, it was her life coming back to her. And it all started with a simple half cup of cheese and the courage to change her morning signal.
Dr. Gupta, I want to talk about a very specific and frankly frightening moment that many seniors experience. That split second of instability when you first stand up from a chair. You go to rise, and for a moment your thighs feel like jelly, or there is a visible tremor in your knees. Most of us just wait a second, shake it out, and keep going, telling ourselves it is just stiffness. But you've warned that this run-chun or leg trembling is actually a loud alarm bell from our body. It is a sign that the foundation is compromised. Could you walk us through what is actually happening in those few seconds of trembling, and perhaps tell us about a patient who ignored these signs until it almost cost them their mobility?
That jelly leg feeling is a critical warning sign that we call neuromuscular lag. I think of a patient named Carlos Ramirez, a 65-year-old from San Antonio, Texas. Carlos was a vibrant man, still working part-time, but he started noticing that whenever he stood up after lunch, his legs would shake for about 5 or 6 seconds. He brushed it off, thinking he was just tired or that he'd been sitting too long. He even joked with his wife that he was vibrating with energy. But in reality, his muscles were so depleted of the necessary recovery proteins that his nervous system was struggling to recruit enough muscle fibers to hold his weight. Carlos was at high risk for a catastrophic fall, but because he didn't feel pain, he didn't think it was a problem. One afternoon, he stood up too quickly to answer the door, his legs misfired, and he nearly went through a glass coffee table. That was the wake-up call that brought him to my clinic.
That is terrifying. The idea that a joke about vibrating with energy could actually be the precursor to a life-changing injury. It's so easy to dismiss these things when they don't hurt, isn't it? We are conditioned to only worry when there is pain, but you're saying that instability is just as urgent as agony. For Carlos, what was the underlying cause of this specific afternoon trembling? He was 65, relatively young for these kinds of issues. Was it his diet, or was there something about his afternoon slump that was making his legs so vulnerable? in those moments of standing up?
With Carlos, it was a classic case of hidden muscle starvation. He would eat a huge, heavy lunch, often a lot of meat, and then feel sluggish all afternoon. He thought he was getting plenty of protein, but because he was eating it all at once in the middle of the day, his body was overwhelmed, his insulin levels would spike, and instead of that protein going to his leg muscles, it was being diverted or simply not utilized because his muscle receptors were clogged by the heavy fats and sugars in his meal. I explained to him that his afternoon trembling was a sign of recovery failure. His legs were literally giving up because they hadn't been properly recharged since the night before. His breakfast was just coffee, so by 2 p.m. his leg muscles were running on fumes. The trembling was his nervous system frantically trying to find strength that simply wasn't there.
So his legs were misfiring because they were essentially empty, even though he felt full from his lunch. It's a paradox, being overfed but undernourished at the cellular level. When you started working with Carlos, how did you address this specific afternoon weakness? You've mentioned that for him, the solution involved a surprising combination, tofu and red bell peppers. That sounds so different from the cottage cheese advice for the morning. Why did he need this specific afternoon boost? And how did it help stop the trembling that was putting him in such danger?
For Carlos, we had to focus on repair without the crash. I had him switch his heavy meat-laden lunch for a lighter muscle-cleansing meal. We used tofu because it is a clean protein that doesn't cause the same heavy insulin spike as red meat, and we paired it with red bell peppers. Why red bell peppers? Because they are one of the highest sources of vitamin C, which is essential for collagen synthesis and repairing the connective tissues that hold the leg muscles together. I told him, Carlos, we are going to stop clogging your system and start cleaning it. Within 10 days of making this switch, the afternoon trembling stopped. He found that when he stood up, his legs felt solid, like they were anchored to the floor again. He told me it was the first time in years he didn't feel like he was walking on ice. By timing his nutrients correctly, cleansing in the afternoon and building in the morning, he saved himself from a fall that likely would have ended his working career.
Dr. Gupta, we've talked a lot about what to add to our plates, cottage cheese, leucine, bell peppers, but I want to talk about the saboteurs. There are foods that many of us think of as innocent or even healthy for seniors, but you argue they are actually closing the door on our muscle recovery. You mentioned earlier that sugar and salt are killers for muscle repair, especially for the over 60 crowd. This is confusing because we are often told to drink electrolyte drinks or have low-fat yogurt, which are often packed with hidden sugars. Why are these substances so much more dangerous for our legs than we realize? Is it just about weight gain, or is there a deeper chemical theft happening that robs our legs of their strength?
This is a critical point, Jane. It's not about calories, it's about cellular communication. When we consume high amounts of refined sugar, even the hidden sugars in flavored yogurts or healthy granola bars, it causes an insulin spike that actually desensitizes our muscles to protein. Think of insulin like a key that opens the cell to let nutrients in. If you have too much sugar, the lock gets jammed. This is called insulin resistance. For a 70-year-old, this means that even if you eat the perfect amount of leucine, your muscle cells can't hear the signal because the sugar has deafened them. Sugar is essentially closing the door that we are trying so hard to open with our cottage cheese. And salt is just as bad. Excess sodium causes cellular swelling and inflammation that chokes the microcirculation in our calves and feet, making our legs feel heavy and waterlogged by 4 p.m.
Deafening the muscle cells, that is a chilling way to put it. It means we could be doing all the hard work of choosing the right proteins, but if we have that sweet treat or that salty snack, we are effectively canceling out our progress. I think of all the sugar-free or low-fat products marketed to seniors that are actually loaded with sodium or artificial sweeteners to make up for the flavor. We think we are being careful, but we are actually jamming the lock. If someone is listening and realizes they've been jamming their own locks, how quickly can the body recover if they cut out these saboteurs? Is the damage to our insulin sensitivity permanent after 60, or can we unjam the lock and let the strength back in?
The beauty of the human body is its resilience. You can start unjamming those locks in as little as 72 hours. When my patients cut out the hidden sugars, especially the morning sugars like orange juice or sweetened cereal, they often report that the brain fog lifts and their legs feel lighter within days. I tell them to think of sugar as muscle poison after 60. We have to be very protective of our peptide pathways. When you stop the sugar and salt cycle, you lower systemic inflammation. This allows the bioactive peptides from things like cottage cheese to actually reach the muscle fibers. It's like clearing a highway of traffic so the repair trucks can finally get to the construction site. One of the biggest changes my patients make is switching from flavored healthy yogurt to plain Greek yogurt or cottage cheese. It's a small flavor sacrifice for a massive gain in mobility.
It's a trade-off, a moment of sweetness for a lifetime of movement. I think when we put it in those terms, the choice becomes much clearer. We are often looking for a miracle cure, but sometimes the miracle is simply stopping the harm. It's about being a gatekeeper for our own cells. If we want our legs to stay strong, we have to stop poisoning the very pathways that deliver that strength. It requires a certain level of discipline, but the reward, being able to walk through a park or play with grandchildren without feeling heavy, is surely worth more than any sugary snack.
Absolutely. I often tell my patients that every time they choose a clean protein over a processed one, they are voting for their future independence. The heaviness that people feel in the late afternoon isn't just tiredness. It is often the physical manifestation of cellular inflammation caused by what they ate for breakfast and lunch. By becoming a gatekeeper, as you said, you are ensuring that your anabolic pulse isn't wasted. You are making sure the shove on that rusty door actually counts. It's about respecting the biological machinery we have left and giving it the best possible environment to thrive. It's never too late to start cleaning the highway.
Dr. Gupta, we've covered the building in the morning and the cleansing at lunch, but there is a specific time of day that many seniors dread, the late afternoon, around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock p.m. That is when the heaviness really sets in, when the ankles might start to swell, and the thought of even walking to the mailbox feels like a chore. You've mentioned a 5-minute habit that can act like a circulatory spark plug for the legs during this difficult afternoon window. It involves something quite surprising, a smoothie with beets and cacao. It sounds more like a dessert than a medical intervention. Could you tell us about how this specific habit helped someone like Eleanor White and why these two ingredients are so powerful for the heavy leg syndrome?
Eleanor White is a wonderful example. At 73, living in the beautiful but hilly terrain of Boulder, Colorado, she was struggling. She told me her legs felt like sandbags by sunset. She had the will to walk, but her pipes were failing her. You see, after 60, our nitric oxide levels, which are responsible for keeping our blood vessels open and flexible, drop by about 50%. This means the blood pools in our lower legs, leading to that heavy sandbag feeling. I introduced Eleanor to what I call the flow smoothie. Beets are incredibly rich in natural nitrates, which the body converts into nitric oxide. It's like a natural vasodilator that opens up the pipes in the legs. And cacao, pure dark cacao, is loaded with flavanols that improve the elasticity of the veins. For Eleanor, this wasn't a treat. It was a vascular tune-up.
Sandbags is such a vivid description of that late-day fatigue. It's a physical weight that drains the spirit as much as the body. To think that a simple combination of beets and cacao could act as a vascular tune-up is fascinating. I imagine Eleanor was skeptical at first. Beets aren't exactly everyone's favorite vegetable. But how did she incorporate this into her day, and what was the turning point for her? Did she start to feel the lightness return to her steps? And how long did it take for that nitric oxide spark plug to actually start firing?
Eleanor was definitely a skeptic. She hated beets. But I showed her how to blend them with a little bit of dark cacao and maybe a splash of almond milk to mask the earthy taste. I told her to drink it around 3 o'clock p.m., right before the heaviness usually started. Within just 3 days, she called me from her porch. She said, "Dr. Gupta, for the first time in 2 years, I walked down to my mailbox and back without having to sit down afterward." The turning point was realizing that her heaviness wasn't a muscle problem, it was a delivery problem. Her muscles were fine, but the oxygen and nutrients couldn't get through the clogged pipes. The beet cacao pulse flushed her system. It's a 5-minute habit that essentially resets the circulation for the evening, allowing seniors to enjoy their dinner and maybe an evening stroll without feeling like they are dragging weights behind them.
It's about restoring the flow. We often think that if the legs are tired, we just need more rest. But your advice suggests that we actually need more circulation. By opening up those pipes with the right nutrients, we are giving the legs the oxygen they need to keep going. It makes me think about how many people are missing out on their golden years, missing out on sunsets or evening walks, simply because they are oxygen-starved in their lower limbs. For Eleanor in Boulder, those hills must have felt a lot smaller once her delivery system was back online.
They did indeed. Eleanor eventually started a smoothie club with her neighbors. What I love about her story is that it shows how targeted nutrition can solve very specific problems. The heaviness of aging isn't one single thing. It's a combination of muscle loss and circulatory decline. By addressing the circulation in the afternoon with the Flow smoothie, we are supporting the building work we did in the morning with the cottage cheese. It's a holistic approach. Eleanor told me she felt like she got her afternoons back. That is the ultimate goal, not just to live longer, but to live larger in the hours we have. A 5-minute habit for a whole evening of freedom, that is a trade I think anyone would make.
Dr. Gupta, we've gathered so many pieces of the puzzle today: the anabolic pulse of cottage cheese in the morning, the muscle-cleansing tofu at lunch, the vascular spark of beets and cacao in the afternoon. It feels like we are building a manual for reclaiming our legs after 60. But as we all know, knowing what to do is only half the battle. The real magic happens in the rhythm. You've emphasized that the order and the timing are just as important as the foods themselves. If you were to summarize this golden routine for someone who is feeling overwhelmed, how do we stack these habits to ensure our muscles don't just survive, but actually revive? How do we move from theory to a lifestyle that sticks?
You're right, Jane. Consistency and sequencing are everything. I tell my patients to think of their day like a construction project. You can't put the roof on before the foundation is poured. Step 1 is always the foundation phase, that 40-minute morning window. You must hit that 30-gram protein threshold with a focus on leucine, the cottage cheese strategy. This pours the concrete for the day. Step 2 is the maintenance phase at lunch. Light plant-based proteins like tofu and vitamin C-rich peppers to clean the site and keep inflammation low. Step 3 is the flow phase in the late afternoon, the beet cacao pulse to keep the delivery trucks moving through the pipes. And finally, step 4 is the restoration phase, a light dinner followed by deep sleep, where the body takes all those materials we've provided and actually installs them into the muscle fibers. If you skip the morning foundation, the rest of the day is just patchwork.
Patchwork is exactly how many of us have been living, trying to fix things here and there, but never addressing the structural foundation. This sequence feels so logical when you lay it out. It's about working with the body's natural clock rather than against it. I imagine for many, the hardest part is that first 40 minutes of the day, changing the coffee and toast habit that has been there for 40 years. But as we saw with Mary and Frank and Carlos, the reward for that one change is almost immediate. Is there a grace period for these habits? Or is this something we have to commit to 100% of the time to see the revival of our legs?
I always tell my patients, well, don't let perfect be the enemy of better. If you can get it right 5 days a week, you will see a massive difference. Your body is incredibly adaptive. Once you start giving it the right signals, it begins to expect them. You'll find that you actually crave that morning protein because your muscles are hungry for it. The revival happens in stages. First, the steadiness returns, that's the nervous system. Then the lightness returns, that's the circulation. Finally, the power returns, that's the actual muscle growth. It's a journey of a few months, but it starts in just a few days. The golden routine isn't a diet, it's a renegotiation with your aging process. You're telling your body, we aren't done yet, we are still building.
I love that renegotiating with the aging process. It's a very empowering way to look at it. We aren't just accepting the decline, we are counter-offering with a better plan. It seems like the order of things is what gives us the most leverage over our biology. For someone listening who feels like their legs are far gone, is there a point where it is too late for this routine to work? Or is the muscle building machine always ready to be restarted no matter how much rust has accumulated?
In my 50 years of medicine, I have never seen a body that was too far gone to improve. I've seen 90-year-olds regain the ability to walk to the park. I've seen 80-year-olds start hiking again. The rust can always be cleared. The mTOR switch doesn't disappear, it just gets dusty from disuse. When you stack these habits, the building, the cleansing, and the flow, you are providing a comprehensive rehabilitation that addresses every reason why legs feel weak. It is a resurrection of your physical potential. My message to everyone over 60 is this: your legs are waiting for you to lead them. If you give them the right sequence of support, they will carry you much further than you ever imagined possible. The golden routine is the map. You just have to take the first step.
Dr. Gupta, we have traveled quite a distance today from the hollow feeling in our thighs to the flow smoothie in the afternoon. But as we wrap up, I want to touch on something deeper than just biology. There is a profound dignity in being able to stand on your own 2 feet. When we lose our leg strength, we lose more than just mobility. We lose our place in the world, the ability to visit friends, to stand in the kitchen and cook a family meal, to walk a daughter down the aisle. You've seen 20,000 patients, each with a story. Beyond the leucine and the nitric oxide, what have you learned about the spirit of those who refuse to let their legs fail them? What is the human heart of this muscle science?
That is a beautiful question, Jane. You're right. The legs are the pillars of our independence. In my 5 decades of practice, I've realized that strength isn't just about how much you can lift. It's about presence. When a senior feels weak, they start to withdraw. They decline invitations. They stop going to church. They become invisible. I've seen the light go out in people's eyes when they think they are becoming a burden. But I've also seen that light come roaring back when they realize they can trust their bodies again. I remember one patient who told me, "Dr. Gupta, when I could finally walk to the mailbox again, I felt like I was returning to society." That is the human heart of this, restoring a person's voice by restoring their legs. Science gives us the how, but the why is the human desire to remain a part of the world until the very last breath.
Restoring a person's voice by restoring their legs. That is such a profound way to think about it. Our mobility is our agency. It's how we show up for the people we love. It's been so enlightening to realize that the frailty we fear isn't an inevitability, but often just a nutritional misunderstanding. You've given us so much hope today, not just through data, but through the stories of Mary, Frank, Carlos, and Eleanor. It's a reminder that we are more malleable than we think, even in our 7th or 8th decade. For those listening who are about to head to the kitchen to find that cottage cheese, what is your final word of encouragement for their journey back to steadiness?
My final word is this: do not underestimate the power of small and steady. You don't have to change your whole life tomorrow, just change your first 40 minutes. Treat your legs with the respect they deserve. They have carried you for 60, 70, or 80 years. They are your oldest friends. Give them the leucine key, give them the nitric oxide flow, and most importantly, give them your belief. Aging is a privilege, and strength is a choice we make every single morning at the breakfast table. It has been a true joy to share these secrets with you and your audience, Jane. I hope everyone listening feels a little lighter in their spirit and a little steadier in their step today. Thank you for letting me share my life's work with you.
Dr. Gupta, thank you. Your warmth and your wisdom have been a gift to us all. You've reminded us that Sao 60 Toi Chanyo Kong Fai Dojia, that our strength is waiting to be awakened. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on Healthy Kidneys After 60. We hope this conversation has sparked a new sense of possibility for your own pillars of strength. Remember, your journey to independence starts with that very next meal. If you found today's episode helpful, please do subscribe to our channel and share this with someone you love who might be feeling a little heavy in their step. We have many more life-changing conversations coming your way soon. Until next time, I'm Jane Pauley. Stay strong, stay curious, and keep moving forward. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye, everyone, and take care of those legs.